Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your curiosity, a whole stack of interesting sources, and really boil them down to the key insights you need.
Yeah, quickly and, thoroughly, hopefully, without that feeling of being totally overwhelmed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed, maybe finding a few of those aha moments.
And today, our mission, you could say, is to understand something we all deal with, sparking positive change.
Right, whether that's at work, in our communities, maybe even personally.
Exactly. We've got some great material looking at different ways to pinpoint where we can actually make a difference and, importantly, how to get those changes rolling.
We'll be looking at all sorts of examples, from a hospital receiving department all the way to bigger global challenges.
It's quite a range.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the first things that really stood out to me was this idea that, well, sometimes the system isn't great, but it's been around so long.
It just becomes normal.
Yeah, it's just the way we do things, even if it's, clearly not working that well.
Absolutely. That hospital receiving department example is really spot on for this.
The multi-day delivery times.
Right. For essential supplies. It just became the standard. People stopped thinking, could this be faster, better? And the sources point out that inside these ingrained habits, there's usually a lot of what they call waste.
And waste here isn't just like throwing stuff away, is it? It's broader.
Much broader. It's really any activity that doesn't add value for the customer, whoever your customer is in that situation.
So like the example of the receiving team having to chase down missing packages, that follow-up time is waste.
Precisely. Even if the follow-up itself is done efficiently, the need for it points to a flaw upstream. That's the waste. It's not just about the obvious inefficiencies, but how easily we get used to them.
Yeah, it's almost like they become invisible.
And what's really wild is how these unnecessary steps done over and over can start to feel essential, indispensable even.
Like that story about the corrugating machine.
Exactly. Shutting it down every single day during lunch because of this old power issue.
That was fixed years ago.
Right. Nobody even remembered why they did it. It was just baked into the routine.
Wow.
And the real kicker isn't just that old problems stick around, but that we often don't even see them without looking directly, costing time, resources every day.
So, okay, how do we actually break out of that? How do we see past the way we do things and find those spots where change can actually happen?
Well, one key strategy that comes up again and again in the sources is going and seeing the work.
Sounds simple. Maybe too simple.
You'd think so, but it's incredibly powerful. It means getting out of the meeting room, moving beyond what one source brilliantly calls guessathons.
Guessathons. Love that.
And actually watching the process you want to improve, like that hospital team physically following the packages.
Right, to see where things were really getting stuck, not just where they thought they were getting stuck.
Exactly. And that direct observation, it led to some real eye-openers for them.
Like realizing packages were being picked up and put down, 5 times unnecessarily?
Or the executive finding out about that pointless daily machine shutdown. It just hammers home the difference between assumptions and, reality on the ground.
Oh, it really does. You can't manage what you don't see properly.
Right. And as that turnaround consultant, Paul Fioravanti, points out, you have to talk to the people closest to the action, closest to the customer, closest to the core work.
They have the real perspective.
They really do. It's unfiltered. So it's not just about watching. It's about challenging your own assumptions based on what you learn directly from the source and empowering those people.
Okay, so we've seen we have this better understanding. But what actually drives the change? What gets it moving?
Well, the sources really emphasize something that, maybe surprisingly, leaders often underestimate. Progress itself, the feeling of making progress.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, but the research is pretty clear. Most managers, they don't rank progress high on the list of motivators for their teams.
That is surprising.
Isn't it? But seeing things improve, seeing tangible results, that can be incredibly motivating. Think about that hospital team again.
Right.
Once they saw, hey, we don't have to pick up these boxes 5 times, or we don't need to dash things this way, their work felt different, more meaningful.
And their own enthusiasm started driving it.
Exactly. They saw it was possible.
That quote from Frank Morasso about the empty receiving room at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful image of progress.
It really is. Clear, visual proof things got done. And it wasn't about throwing money at it. It was about rethinking the work and seeing it pay off.
Which, I guess, leads nicely into the next idea.
Yeah.
Targeting the constraint.
Yeah, that's a big one. The constraint is basically the main bottleneck. the single biggest thing holding you back from reaching a specific goal.
So finding that one limiting factor.
And focusing your efforts there, because improving anything else might not actually improve the overall output if the bottleneck stays the same. This comes from the theory of constraints.
Right, which says every system has that primary bottleneck.
And hitting that bottleneck is usually the most effective way to improve the whole system.
The Chick-fil-A drive-thru example was pretty cool for this.
Yeah, using a drone. That's definitely going and seeing from a new angle.
Literally. And they saw the line backing up onto the street was the real problem, losing customers.
So their whole closing the gaps strategy was aimed squarely at that constraint, the flow of cars, and order-taking speed right at the window.
And it's not just operational stuff, the Norwood Seniors Network example.
That's a great one, too. Their goal was growth, but the constraint wasn't demand. It was finding enough good home care workers at a wage they could afford.
So their strategy focused entirely on that.
Exactly. Selective hiring, really investing in keeping the good people they found, tackling that core constraint head on. It's always tied to a specific goal, though. That's key.
And it can be personal, too, right? The sticky notes.
Yeah, the sticky note appreciations.
Yeah.
If the goal is a more positive relationship, maybe the constraint is a habit of focusing on the negative.
So the sticky notes become a small intervention, targeting that specific mental bottleneck, looking for the good stuff.
Precisely. It's about intentionally cultivating a different habit.
And what was interesting, too, was how changing the goal can actually change the constraint.
Oh, absolutely. The Veterans Loan Forgiveness Program.
Right. First, the goal was maybe just making applications easier. The constraint was the complex process.
But then they shifted the goal to actually improving veterans' financial health more broadly.
And suddenly the constraint wasn't the application, it was finding eligible people and just forgiving the loans proactively.
Totally different bottleneck emerged from changing the overall aim.
Okay, but what if you're looking at a problem and it's complex and you're honestly not sure where the bottleneck is or even where to start looking?
That's where another strategy comes in handy. Studying the bright spots.
So looking at what is working.
Exactly. Instead of just focusing on the problems, you actively look for successes, even small ones, within the situation.
And then try to figure out why they're succeeding.
Right. What's different? What are they doing that works? And can we clone it? Can we replicate it? It's like reverse engineering success.
That makes a lot of sense. Don't just fix the bad, amplify the good.
You got it. The U.S. Air Force cockpit story is a classic example.
Designing for the average pilot.
Which turned out to fit almost no one perfectly, because averages hide the variation.
Right.
So by implicitly studying the bright spots, pilots who performed exceptionally well despite the standard cockpit, or maybe just recognizing the need for individual fit, they moved to adjustable designs. Much better outcome.
Because they looked at the individual needs, not just the flawed average.
Or Gartner looking at their most successful client partnerships.
Finding specific things those partners did differently.
Yeah, specific practices that really worked, which they could then teach and encourage across the board.
And the animal shelter example, the return to field idea, that was framed as a bright spot, right?
Definitely. It challenged a huge, long-held assumption that every stray cat needs sheltering.
But by returning healthy community cats to their territory after neutering.
They solved multiple problems at once. Overcrowding, resource drain, even euthanasia rates. It was a bright spot that came from questioning the core premise.
You can see the connection back to going and seeing here too, can't you?
Absolutely. You might spot a bright spot in the data. Maybe one team is outperforming others.
But then you need to go and see why. What are they actually doing differently on the ground?
You have to observe it to really understand the key factors you might want to replicate. They're very complementary strategies.
Okay, one more big strategy, mapping the system. This it sounds broader.
It is. It's about taking that step back, looking at the whole picture, the whole flow, trying to spot those hidden livers for change.
Things you might miss if you're just focused on your own little piece.
Exactly. Which is a huge issue with organizational silos, right?
Oh, yeah. Departments focusing only on their own metrics, their own tasks.
And totally missing how their work impacts others, or how a small change somewhere else could make their jobs and the whole section much easier.
So mapping the system isn't just like drawing an org chart.
No, it's about understanding the flow. How does work actually move? Who does what? Where are the handoffs? Where are the dependencies?
Like that hospital radiology example. That was fascinating.
The University of Iowa Hospital, yeah. They mapped the patient journey for getting contrast dye.
and found nurses were spending time administering it.
Right, a task that could be done perfectly well and much more efficiently by receptionists.
If they just had.
A small refrigerator to store the contrast safely at the reception desk.
Wow. Such a simple fix, but you never see it from inside the nursing silo or the reception silo alone.
Exactly. That kind of insight often only emerges when you look across those boundaries and map the whole process.
And it seems like mapping the system also forces you to challenge assumptions, like really fundamental ones.
It definitely can. The Environmental Defense Fund example is powerful there.
There's methane emissions.
Yeah. For years, the focus in climate change discussions was overwhelmingly on CO2.
Right.
But by mapping the whole system of greenhouse gases and their sources and impacts, they realized methane, especially from things like natural gas leaks, was a huge, relatively overlooked lever.
A hidden factor they found by broadening the map.
Exactly. It required looking at the system with fresh eyes and questioning the dominant assumption about CO2 being the only game in town, essentially.
Okay, so let's sort of recap the toolkit here. We've got going and seeing the work, getting firsthand observation.
Understanding the reality, then targeting the constraint, finding and focusing on the biggest bottleneck holding you back.
Studying the bright spots, learning from what's already working, reverse engineering success.
Right. And finally, mapping the system, taking that wider view to find hidden levers and maybe challenge some core assumptions.
They all seem pretty interconnected, really. Different lenses to look at a problem.
They absolutely are. Different ways to get a deeper, more nuanced understanding of what's going on so you can find the most effective ways to make things better.
So on that note, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Yeah. Think about a situation in your own world, work, life, community, whatever.
Where could one of these strategies give you a new perspective? Could you benefit from actually truly going and seeing how things work day to day?
Is there a bottleneck, a constraint that maybe you haven't quite put your finger on yet?
Or are there successes, bright spots happening already that you could learn from and amplify?
Or maybe it's time to step back, try to map out the bigger picture, see the connections you might be missing.
Think about those ingrained habits, the potential roadblocks, the wins you already have, and that wider system. You might just find that fresh angle, that hidden lever, to unlock some real positive change.